So welcome everybody to the next in the series of RPS Scotland Talks. And tonight we've got Danielle Macleod from away up in the Isle of Lewis. So that's the beauty of the internet type stuff, that you can get these things back. So it doesn't matter where people are. Last month's talk was Bella, and Bella was across in Texas when she was doing her talk. So we've gone from one side of the Atlantic to slightly nearer this side of the Atlantic, but still stuck out there on the Atlantic coast up in Lewis. And Danielle is an interesting photographer and an interesting artist. And I first saw her stuff when I was across in Lewis at working across there last summer. I went to Island Darkroom, and if anybody's ever up in Lewis, I would recommend you go along to Island Darkroom and have a wee strafeg around, because it's very, very interesting. It's a wonderful place, and they do a wonderful bunch of stuff. So I seen Danielle's stuff there, and I was instantly struck by the quality and by the resonance that it had to the local community. I lived in Lewis for a few years myself, about 40 years ago, when I first started work after university, and so her stuff really, to me, it really struck a chord. So I hope that everybody else agrees the same. So I'm going to pass over to Danielle, and she's going to share her screen, and we'll crack on with the talk. And it's on recording, so if anybody misses it, we'll get them catching up later on. If you've got any big questions you want to ask in the meantime, just fire them into the meeting chat box, and we'll try and answer them as we go along. And at the end, Danielle can take some more open questions or more general questions, because I think what you will find is that a lot of this stuff is going to be quite thought-provoking and quite thought-provoking for everybody. I think this is going to be a really interesting talk. So I'm going to pass on to Danielle. Stop me talking. Danielle, welcome along. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm so I'm so thrilled to be doing this. Thank you so much for asking. I'm really happy with everyone who's attending as well, and the people who are still coming in. So I think I will go straight to the screen share right now to get all the technical stuff out of the way. But I'm really happy for people to, as we go through the presentation, if anybody wants to put any questions into the chat box relating to the slides that you're seeing on the screen, feel free. I'm quite happy to make this quite conversational. And then if you've maybe got more general kind of questions, we could save that for the end. But yeah, feel free to type away. I'll be kind of keeping an eye on the chat box. So, right, let's go to screen share. And let's go to desktop. There we go. Is that moving for everybody?
Yes.
Thumbs up? Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'll actually bring this down a couple of slides. So yeah, I am currently living, and I'm from the Isle of Lewis up north, and a good starting point would probably be to say that I graduated from uni. I went to Glasgow School of Art and did a course called Communication Design. So I graduated from there in 2020, the year the pandemic hit. So it was a really strange kind of end to the year, because the year technically got cut short. So I kind of left my university experience feeling like I hadn't quite found my visual language or my voice yet as a photographer, as an artist. And since I technically did a design course, I don't really think that I was even seeing myself as an artist at that kind of point. Because now I think now I kind of see myself more as a kind of fine artist. So yeah, so pandemic happened. I came back to Stornoway with my husband. We're both from the Isle of Lewis, and we stayed in my husband's parents' caravan site for a year. We stayed in one of their caravans, and the local art centre in Stornoway called In Londor was running this thing called a menteeship or a mentorship, and I thought it would be really good for me, considering how my final year at uni had ended. And since I still wasn't too sure or too confident about how I wanted to move forward with my practice or with my art, I thought it would be a really good thing to take part in. in terms of having a mentor and just getting that extra bit of support and an extra bit of guidance. And my mentor was actually Mary Law, who runs Island Darkroom, what Steve was talking about. So it was just a great experience. So when I was at university, I enjoyed, my themes would always be around the Isle of Lewis, the Western Isles, and that wasn't it was just what my kind of heart was drawn to, I suppose. I always wanted to make work about home, so I'm not sure if I was just very homesick while I lived in Glasgow. And I enjoyed kind of taking landscapes, and I enjoyed studio work as well, like using lighting and stuff in the studio, but I hadn't quite kind of found a way of combining the both. And I remember feeling quite frustrated at this point of my kind of photographic journey. I was like, I enjoy taking photographs, but I really feel like I'm missing out on doing stuff with my hands. I didn't use the darkroom that often, so I just felt like I really wanted to make things and craft things, and photography wasn't giving that to me. So that's how I kind of found doing studio stuff quite fun when I was at uni. But anyway, with that kind of, I suppose, artistic frustration, I started taking part in this menteeship and found it quite difficult to begin with, to be honest, because I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to go in photography wise at all. And it was actually during one of the meetings, Mary prompted me and said, you quite often talk about masks, which I was really interested in. I had a few books about masks. And then she showed me a picture by this artist. Let me click on, wrong way, there we go. She showed me a picture by this artist called Margaret Fay Shaw. So this was an American lady who moved to South Uist, I think. And in the 1930s, she started documenting the lives of the people who lived there. So my friend Mary showed me these pictures, and I was just kind of blown away by them. So these are children getting dressed up for Halloween, and they're using, well, things they're finding to construct their outfits. So there's sheep wool in there, there's leather in there, and kind of other, maybe probably bits of heather as well that they're finding. And I just, this photo has really resonated with me throughout my whole photographic practice to date, I would say. Because previously when I was looking at all these kind of books to do with masks and stuff, it very often was about like other cultures. You know, sometimes there'd be like European stuff, but never really, I wasn't coming across Celtic things that often, or things that kind of felt like I connected with. So this I really did connect with, and the images still inform my practice in a really kind of, you know, subconscious way, I think. So they've stuck with me. So there we go. So my first body of work outside of uni was Guardians, and this is the project I kind of started and completed during the menteeship that I took part in. So this is the first shoot I did, actually. So this here is called the Pentland Guardian, and it was the second mask I made for the project. So the kind of, this project was really important for my kind of personal growth, because I had, during my time at university, I'd gone through a deconversion of my faith. I was a like committed Christian while I was at university, and you know, an active Christian kind of in the community. And during my time there, I my faith just kind of ended. I couldn't believe in the things I believed in anymore. It just wasn't feeling real for me. So my whole kind of belief system came down, and then there was just this kind of emptiness of, well, what is going to fill that space that belief was in before? So this project was really about that and investigating things I wanted to believe in for myself. So where my kind of Christian faith once was and the space that filled within me, now I was like, well, what things do I want to believe in? What am I choosing to believe in? What values do I think are important? So each mask in this series, there's 5 in total. They all represent a kind of a different belief and a different value. So this one here was about embracing your wild nature and your wildness. I was reading a book called Women Who Run with Wolves by an author called Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And I just loved her writing, and it was all about just letting go, really, and being expressive and being playful and just kind of really putting yourself out there. So that's what inspired this first mask, was just the imagery of, okay, what is like wild to me? And I had the idea that I wanted to make this big, well, a big structure, and I knew I kind of wanted some kind of horn-like thing. And then I hadn't done any kind of mask making before, ever. So I was like, okay, right, how do I go about making a structure that's quite big? I don't know how I want it to look yet. I just kind of have a rough idea of what is wild in my head. So my husband's grandfather used to be a fisherman, and he had an old prawn creel, and I thought it was a really good height for a mask. And I thought it was a really good structure because the way my brain was working, I was thinking, I don't know how to make a mask from scratch. I've never done this before. So I think I need a kind of base or a structure that already exists. So I started off with this prawn creel, and I was like, yep, I like the height, I like the shape of that. I just had to take everything off it. And this was still kind of during COVID. We were allowed out and about and we could see people. But I was just working in the caravan I was living in the kind of kitchen area. So didn't really have access to a studio or a outhouse or anything like that. So yeah, and this is one of my favorite things about the mask making process is the people I get in touch with who have things that I could potentially use. So first of all, it was Scott's grandfather with the prawn creel, and then I thought, okay, right, if this is a wild creature I'm wanting to make, then I think something quite hairy would work. And what's something that's potentially going to be really accessible on the island is sheep wool. So turns out one of my friends who I hadn't seen in quite a while, had sheep, and they were sharing their sheep, and she was saying that they don't do anything with the wool because I think it cost too much to actually kind of do anything with it. So it was actually more cost effective to just shear the sheep and then dispose of the wool or just stash it somewhere. So she had loads and loads of bags in her barn. So I took a few, and using paper and PVA glue, I think, I created this mask. And with 2 driftwood sticks that I'd found on the beach, I kind of popped them through I think it was cardboard actually I used in PVA glue, pierced it through the cardboard and stuck it there. So it was quite a heavy head piece, but since it was a creel, it had a hole at the bottom for it to comfortably kind of get on Scott's head, and his shoulders were just wide enough. So this whole experience was just really, really enjoyable, really fun. I was in my element, and since I was exploring my own belief, since that was the kind of theme of the project, I was really enjoying not having to like fact check myself or think about, am I responding in an appropriate way, or is the work doing justice to the source material, because the source material was me and my experience. And it was my first time working in that kind of way, and I really, really enjoyed it. So now that the mask was made, I took it out into an environment to take pictures of. So one of the first kind of questions I had to ask myself with this series was, I'm probably only going to have a few pictures. It ended up being 5, and I think I kind of made that a rough goal for myself in the beginning. So I was like, it would make sense if they were all colour, or if they were all black and white. And I have a medium format camera, so I'd be buying film for the shoot. So I kind of needed to make my choice and then purchase the film. So I tried out this colour picture is shot digitally, and the one on the right was shot on film. So I really liked the picture that was in colour with this particular mask, because I just thought the colours of the mask with the cardigan and the grass, it all kind of just spoke to each other quite nicely. But I thought the black and white image was kind of equally good, had a slightly more haunting vibe, which I kind of enjoyed. And I think having seen the picture of Margaret Faye Shaw's, children dressed up for Halloween images, I quite enjoyed the timelessness that, or the no sense of time that a black and white image offers. So I thought with the type of work I was wanting to make with these masks, black and white imagery was actually more, it gave your imagination more to work with, that it was, it was more playful with how you could interpret the image. So I chose black and white film to pursue this project. So yeah, I went out to a place called the Pentland Road, which is lots and lots of moorland, and in some areas there were trees, and I just was practicing with moving my model, who was my husband Scott, in different ways. And I hadn't really worked in this way before, bringing a model outside. Like I said, when I was in uni, I did a project about landscapes in the Hebrides, and then I'd shot models in a studio. I hadn't really brought the two together. So I was learning quite a bit about just posing Scott, and just about all the subtleties in body language, but how the slightest movement can actually totally change a picture and change the kind of energy that the model's giving off, I suppose. So these were some of the images that I took, and I would have to, at this point as well, I would shoot my roll of film. I usually took 1 or 2 rolls of film on this shoot anyway, and then I'd have to post it to the mainland, I think it was to Edinburgh I was posting it, to get developed and scanned, and then I would have to wait for the scans to come back to me and the film to come back to me. And there was a few times when, because this ended up being an exhibition, where I had to rescan the work because the scans I'd been sent were too small to blow up big enough for the exhibition. So there was loads of learning happening with how to actually be an artist when you're based on an island and you don't have easy access to Photoshops or Snappy Snaps or a university darkroom. So yeah, so this was another picture from the series. This is the final picture. And this guy is called the Light Guardian. So he had a different value based on him. I'm just looking at some of the comments. Yes, it is kind of like a parallel. There's a nice comment here saying it's kind of a parallel between Christianity and paganism. And I do feel that. I feel with the way I'm working right now, there's just a real spaced play. And yeah, I've felt that myself. And I think it's interesting, kind of, I had a Presbyterian upbringing on the island. So it's really interesting to take pictures about my faith breaking and kind of being rebuilt in a new way, because, you know, I'm just believing in something different now. It's interesting to take these pictures in the same landscape that I kind of grew up in, and the landscape that formed, I suppose, these initial beliefs. So yeah. So this image here is called the Light Guardian, and the whole kind of ethos behind this image was there's light at the end of the tunnel. So keep going, have hope. I really enjoyed kind of that thought, and thought of a way, was thinking of how to visualize it for myself. So the first kind of idea that came to mind was I wanted a tunnel-like structure, something that was quite long, and I had no idea how to make it, because this was something that was completely different to the prawn creel idea. So again, new material. And I think I initially started off by putting expanding foam into a traffic cone, hoping that that would give me a nice cone shape. And it didn't work at all, because I couldn't contain the foam in the traffic cone. It all just spooched out. So then I went round the idea of doing, I think I just scrunched up paper with duct tape to make that cone shape, and then looked up a recipe online for something called paper mache clay, which is what the cone is made up of. So it is essentially a clay-like structure, but made of like toilet paper and polyfiller and glue, I think. And it made this really hard white substance, but I could like sculpt with it. So that duct tape structure that I built, I just scraped layers of this paper mache clay on top, and then when it dried, I could just peel it off the duct tape structure. So it left me with a hollow cone. And then I sanded areas of that down to thin bits, because I thought it would be really cool to put a light in there. So I've actually got a torch in the cone. I can't remember how I fastened it. I don't know if it's in Scott's mouth, and that's how the light's going down. I might have taped a couple of torches to the cone on the other side, and then the light was coming out the way I was taking the photo. So I did that, and that was my general kind of visual interpretation for light at the end of the tunnel. So I thought of, so on the left there, that was what I had, that's the stage I'd kind of gotten to, where I had my cone, I knew I liked the light in it, but I just wasn't, it didn't feel finished yet. And I thought, well, if the whole idea of this is about light and about there being light coming from a place of darkness, I think I really have to shoot this at night. So the photo on the left is actually me trying to use my car headlights to see how that would light an image for me. And I think I was just using my phone here to kind of get a brief, well, just a taste of, was it worth trying to do a shoot with car headlights or not? So that's mostly what I use my mobile phone for, is like quick development things, very, very quick, being like, will it work? Won't it work? Scott, try that pose, or try this pose. So I didn't think the car headlights were working at all, because the light was just far too harsh and far too kind of directional. So I actually had a friend who had aperture lights. So it was continuous lighting. But I knew I wanted to shoot this outside, and these were lights that didn't have batteries, they were plugged in. So this was my first kind of technical obstacle, I suppose, as well, doing the kind of craft that I do now, mask making and photography. I was like, okay, I need to light this outside, and I haven't got battery lights. So my dad had a generator, so I took the generator, and one evening we just carted all the kit outside into a croft beside my house. And my landlords were, well, it's my landlord's croft, and they were happy for us to shoot in there. So while it was still light, I wanted to get the location nailed, and I wanted to pretty much get the pose nailed. And all the outfits in this series of work are just things that I had in my house already. And my model for every image in this series was my husband, Scott, which I felt quite comfortable with because I wasn't quite kind of sure of myself yet as a mask maker and artist. So I knew that Scott would show me a lot of kindness and a lot of grace. So if he was feeling like uncomfortable at all, or if anything was poking at him in an uncomfortable way, he wasn't going to complain. So yeah, we got all that set up before it got dark, and then my friend arrived with his lights. But even the day of the shoot, I still wasn't feeling comfortable with how it looked, because I still just had the cone and this green coat, and I thought maybe I'll put a hat over the cone, but it wasn't finished, and I just knew it needed something else. And growing nearby up a kind of side road was all these gorse bushes, and I was like, maybe that will work. But I don't know if anyone's ever handled gorse bushes before. I hadn't before this shoot. They are really, really spiky and really uncomfortable. So I had to wear like really quite thick garden gloves and get everything cut. And I was like, this could work as like a big kind of hair head thing for the long snout to come out of. So I just got a helmet and duct taped all the gorse onto the helmet, but I had to do that when on site, essentially. So once the lights were all set up and once Scott was dressed and ready and my friend who was helping on the shoot, once we were all ready, that was when the gorse bushes kind of got assembled, because all of Scott's head and face was covered. So it wasn't a kind of mask that he could just take on and off. So that was a bit stressful, but it was a really fun shoot. I really enjoyed having all these kind of different elements to it, and I felt really proud of myself for having successfully shot an image in the, like a well-exposed image in the dark, because it was my first time doing any kind of nighttime photography. So another one from the series is the Armored Guardian. So this guy is, I was inspired by a quote by Theodore Roosevelt, which kind of, I think it's commonly known as the man in the arena quote. It's about resilience and getting back up again if you've been knocked down. So that quote was really kind of resonating with me, and I was like, that's a good belief to have, a good value to have. And I was thinking, well, resilience, armor, toughness, what's a good kind of visual way to interpret that? And I was thinking, well, I quite like the idea of something quite armor-like. And what is a material I can find nearby which is like that, because I didn't have really the skills to do anything with metal. I was just trying to find things that were already around me that kind of were giving off that kind of look, maybe, of something quite hard. And my in-laws were cutting wood for their fire, and all this bark was left over, and it was just in a pile outside. So I took that, and there were really all sorts of different shapes, and the shapes weren't malleable at all. They were really quite stiff. So lots of different cuttings of bark, different shapes, and I was like, I think I could make something quite, this is worth playing around with. So I did, and I was liking the kind of paneling that was happening with the bark, because I thought it looked quite armor-like. And it was really fun coming up with the kind of direction I wanted the mask to go in. It's just kind of like putting pieces of the puzzle together. So I don't really draw from sketches, or I don't sketch initially and then make something. I've always got at this point I had a very rough idea in my head, and the rough idea was the material itself. So I was like, I like this bark. I'm feeling, you know, I feel like it's something I kind of want to play with and try out. And then the mask just becomes itself as I put the pieces together. So there's really just a few things that are going through my head initially that inspire me to pick up the material, and then I'm just playing around with it, and that's how the mask kind of happens. So the one on the right, the image on the right, was the final mask, and I was just making, as I was working, Scott was wearing it every time I was changing it up, and that's how I was seeing how it was looking on a body. So then we went to locations. So quite often I'll kind of scout out locations before I bring the model to the location for the shoot. So this was a place called Ness, and I thought for the Armoured Guardian, it was a good kind of rocky, hard landscape, and I thought it would translate well in black and white film as well, because that was how I was having to get my brain thinking, was in black and white and not colour. So I was like, how's the contrast? So yeah, we tried out a few different locations. The interesting thing about shooting this project and using masks was that my model can't see. So as well as potentially being a little bit uncomfortable with the mask, they are totally blind to where they are. And, you know, on the image on the left, I was kind of right by a cliff. So thankfully, this was a mask that could get put on fairly easily and taken off fairly easily. So Scott could get to exactly where he needed to be. I kind of had the tripod already set up. So I was like, okay, I like this shot, let's give it a go. So the mask could get put on last minute. But at this point, I didn't really enlist many helpers. So it was just me and Scott, and I was running back and forth, like adjusting him and having to clamber up rocks or down rocks to, you know, get his body in the right position, then go look through the viewfinder and think, am I happy with that? Try and communicate to him to tweak something, but he can't see what he's doing. So yeah, it was very fun and kind of stressful sometimes, getting these pictures actually kind of taken, like the logistics of it, when there was just me and my model. But Scott was very patient with me, and I was really thrilled with how the kind of final images turned out. So these were the 5 images from the series in total. I've only kind of spoken in more depth about 3 of them. The other 2 on the left were the New Guardian and the Wandering Guardian. So the one on the left was about new beginnings, and the second one was about following your kind of curiosities and being playful. And I used the paper mache clay for both of these masks to build them. And then the second mask, which is the Wandering Guardian and has a more heart shape, I used eucalyptus leaves for that, and I shot them in different locations in the Isle of Lewis as well. So it was a really great first project to do. It was very personal to me. It was just about my own personal growth and development, and I felt like that gave me full rein to explore however I wanted, because the project was about me and I wasn't making work for anyone else. I was making it for myself. So it was great. And at the end of that menteeship, we had an exhibition in the island darkroom with these 5 images. So again, we kind of, all the kind of facilities for that are on the mainland. So it was sending the files over to Edinburgh and getting them posted and making sure that they got posted to the island on time and that everything was okay. So after my Guardian series, I kind of thought about what to do next, and a commission came out from this organisation called Northward Story Tagging, and they had a whole pile of stories, and they were looking for artists to interpret these stories in a visual way or reimagine them in a visual way. So I thought it would be a really good thing to apply for, and I did. And I was really into the idea of having a new goal. The menteeship was it was great having that support, and then this was me now kind of feeling like I was doing things on my own. So I really wanted a tangible deadline, like a reason to make work. And that is what the Lewis Merman project did for me. So this was the story I chose. There was a list of stories, and you had to pitch what story you wanted to reimagine visually and how you would reimagine it. So this was someone who was based in the Isle of Lewis, who had 2 sightings of a merman in the ocean, and there's a legend in Lewis which is called like the Blue Men of the Minch. So it was a folk tale that kind of already existed, and he kind of talked about in this passage about how the creature or the merman kind of presented itself. So when I was reading it, I was thinking, okay, he talks about branches, he talks about spikes. And I was already thinking of natural materials that I could potentially use to do my own interpretation of the Lewis merman, or the sea dog that he had seen. So I got accepted to take part in this commission. And I thought a really great way of starting off the project would be to meet the storyteller himself, who was Hector. And we had a really great day together, where he took me to the location where he had one of his sightings of the merman. And we just kind of, so that's the bottom right image, was the shore he was working on when he saw what he saw. And he wasn't he was in a boat actually, but the boat was in this kind of general area. So we just walked that shoreline where he could point out where the boat had been, or what things were familiar to him when he experienced what he experienced. And as we went on our walk, I was just taking pictures of the things that were around me. So what types of things are washing up on this beach? If I'm to make a visual interpretation of this merman, what kinds of things am I seeing here which could inspire me? And there was loads of dried up seaweed, which is there in the bottom left corner. There was loads of shells. So it was fab. It was a really nice way of warming up to the project, and to actually hear Hector's experience for myself was really, really interesting. And it just kind of got me excited to make the work. So I decided that the first material I was going to use was shells. In my pitch, I said that I would do 3 different interpretations of the Lewis merman. I like the idea of doing 3 versions of the same thing. So it was the general kind of idea around doing a triptych was how people see things differently, or how things can change over time as well. I just like the idea that things can look different, but it can all be the same thing. So I sourced a whole pile of shells from someone who used to sell scallops, and there was someone I was working with who was just eating a lot of crabs. So he gave me 3 really giant crab shells, and I got to work with sussing out how I was going to construct a mask out of these materials. So again, it was just really intuitive. I had the materials, and I thought the larger crab would be a good kind of forehead. I thought it kind of mimicked a human forehead a little bit, with just a panel of space. And then I allowed everything else to come out from that. So this took a few days, this mask, and I was just constantly having to revisit it and put things in different places and see what was feeling right. again, it was just kind of like Tetris, or piecing the puzzle together naturally. And then at the end, I was like, oh, it felt like it had made itself, if that makes sense. I was just handing it the shells, and it became its own thing. The most interesting thing, though, with making this mask was it was sussing out what adhesive to use. So I noticed that I've kind of started going down a trend of making masks out of new materials every time, and new materials behave very differently. So I kind of feel like a beginner every time I make a mask, because I don't know what adhesives are going to work well. Or with this mask in particular, it was my first time using a grinder. It was my first time using silicone, because that's how I had to piece all the shells together. So I had Dad on the other end of the phone letting me know what type of silicone I should be buying, or, he was giving me all his recommendations. But I was really chuffed with how this mask turned out at the end. It was built on top of a helmet. That was the base. And then the big crab shell was the first thing I put on, and everything else came from that. So I used duct tape as kind of placements, like you can see in the middle picture, when I was just trying things out. And then when I was happy with how they were, I would get everything siliconed up and make it really solid. So today it's a really solid structure, which I can actually is good enough to exhibit alongside images. Because that was one thing I didn't do with Guardians. Not many of my masks were actually durable enough to last more than the photo shoot. So this was something that I was starting to think about now. Come my second project was, I think I want my masks to have a bit more durability. I want them to have a kind of lasting factor. So after I made this mask, this was the first mask I made for the Lewis Merman project, and this was my first shoot. And again, I kind of, since I knew I was doing a triptych and just taking 3 images, I was like, there's going to have to be a similar visual language among the 3. So I was like, do I want to take these images outside, or do I want to shoot them inside? So it's a Mamiya 645 Super that I use, and I've got a 50mm lens and an 80mm lens. And I just bought my camera. It was used, and these are the lenses that it came with, and these are the lenses that I still use. I borrowed my friend's aperture lights again, and I just cleared a section of my dad's barn to use as a backdrop, and thought I would try out Scott modelling with this mask to see how they looked. And this is the images that came out from this particular shoot. I found some hemp, which I think is something that's used in plumbing, which was just lying in my dad's barn. So I let that kind of be hair for the mask. I just thought it kind of added a little bit more life to the creature, I suppose, because that's how I want people to view my images. Is like, this is not a model wearing a mask. I want this to be a totally new creature or thing which has had its photograph taken. So I really did like these photographs, and I thought the mask looked really great in them. And I spent a lot of time, if you look on the picture on the left-hand side, I bought eyelash glue. So I bought makeup glue and just started sticking all these shells onto Scott's body, and I was being very precise with it. So it took a good hour, maybe 2 hours. And I live in the Hebrides. It's not warm up here, so, and it's an old barn, so I think Scott was getting a bit cold. I had a wee electric heater. But he persevered through it all and did really well. So I got him looking how I wanted him to look and put the mask on, and I was really happy with the final image. But I was wondering, does this communicate the story of the Lewis Merman? Like, as a show, as an image which just showcases the mask, I thought it looked really good. But I was like, that isn't what I'm trying to do with this series. I'm trying to tell a bit more of a story. So I thought, let's take this outside and see how it goes. So I took the mask outside, and since more of Scott's body was probably going to get shown in these photographs, I constructed a big neck piece out of razor shells to cover some of his wetsuit. I used to get so envious of looking at images online of models who could be in the water in just their swimsuits, or even, you know, nude photography in the sea and stuff like that. I was so envious of people who had a warm climate that it's actually been quite a process to learn to work with the climate that you have, and learn to accept the climate that you have. So, you know, I had to put a wetsuit on Scott, and that was just something that had to come into the outfits, or I had to consider it when I was thinking of the outfits that my mermen were going to be wearing. You know, was I going to cover up everything or not cover up the wetsuit? So yeah, just again, logistics when you're living in a colder place, because I didn't want Scott to suffer. So this ended up being the final image, or the strongest image of the outdoor shoots, and it was the image that I decided I would base my other two merman interpretations around. I thought that it showcased the mask well, and being outside and having the environment, I thought it was important to have the sea there if I'm telling a story about mermen. But also I really liked how the model's body was interacting with the landscape and how that was telling a bit more of a story. So yeah, it's one of my favorite images that I've taken, I think, is this one. So 1 image down, 2 to go for this series. And I'll go straight to this here. This was my second interpretation of the Lewis merman. When I was thinking back to Hector's story where he was talking about sticks and spiky things, it made me think of something really wild and animalistic. So I wanted to make something quite dragon-like. But again, still feeling like not a professional mask maker. I was like, I need a base or a starting point to build upon. So for the shell mask, I used a helmet. For this, I went to the local charity shop and bought a lampshade and just took all the fabric off. And I had this really great cone shape to start working on a snout. So I collected a whole pile of seaweed from the beach where I live, and for about 2 weeks, I think I had huge bits of seaweed. I'm not sure if it's kelp, but I had thick bits of seaweed drying out in my kitchen, and my kitchen stank, and I was still having to live in this space and navigate in this space. They took absolutely ages to dry, but they shrank down to like 1/3 of the size once they had dried. So between that and driftwood, I built up this kind of cone dragon face, and then I thought, okay, I think I want this to be quite high up. I don't want the model to resemble a human at all. I want this interpretation of the merman to really be have an otherworldly element or feeling to him. So my dad helped me build a big frame, and unfortunately I don't have any pictures of this, I wish I did. My dad helped me build a big frame out of copper piping, which went over the model's shoulders and supported his back, and the lampshade sat on top, and all this black sheep wool, I wove that into old fishing net, and that covered up the copper piping. So that's what gave us the height. So for this shoot, we had to it was a 2-man job to get the mask on Scott. So me and my dad got it on, and then my dad wasn't attending the shoot with us. So he offered to put Scott in a trailer and drive him to our location. So we drove through, it was just my local beach that we shot this image in. So my dad like paraded Scott through the village in a trailer looking like a strange dragon, until we got to the beach, and then Scott only had to walk a short distance to get to where I wanted to shoot. So things to look out for with this shoot. Usually I shoot around 2 rolls of film, and with this mask in particular, I had one particular pose in my mind. So the other images in my film essentially were just making sure that the waves were looking great, that I was in focus, just that the image kind of came together as a whole. And also you can see on the right hand side that you can see a bit of Scott's face if you're looking forward. So I had to make sure I was shooting from one particular side, that you couldn't see any of Scott's like nose or profile, and that the frame wasn't jutting out in any strange way. On the image on the left, there was something happening to the wool that it looked a little bit clunky. And I don't like doing too much editing in post. I like to try and get everything as perfect as I can for the actual shoot, so I've got minimal editing to do later on. So these were the things that were going wrong. I didn't want to see Scott's face. I didn't want there to be a strange lump of wool at the back, and I didn't want the waves to crash into my model and send him off balance. So this was my final image that I was really happy with. And I think I only actually got 1 or 2 images from the 2 rolls of film that I was happy to consider using. But unfortunately, I was really happy with this, and I was like, oh, I'd love to try using this film in the darkroom at some point and trying to make some darkroom prints out of it, because it's a skill I'm trying to learn more about and do more. But since I shot this on the beach, a grain of sand got into my camera and lodged itself wherever the film was. And as I was moving the film through the camera, like changing to the next bit of film, this sand was just scratching all the film that I'd shot. So for this image and the next mask, in the unedited versions of these images, there's just a wee white line scratching across because a grain of sand got into my camera. So the third merman was made out of salmon. And because I thought if we're doing mermen, and the legend of the mermen was that these guys would go up to fishermen and would kind of threaten to hurt or threaten to take the catch off fishermen. So I thought that fish was an important reimagining to have of this creature. So I went up to the salmon factory in Stornoway, and I asked if I could take some of their waste salmon skins if they weren't being used for anything else. And they made sure that I wasn't an activist first. And then when they found out I wasn't an activist, they were happy to give me their waste salmon skins. So I initially tried out drying the salmon skins, so you can see that on the picture on the left-hand side. Because I thought if it's dried, then it's preserved and I've got more time to work with this material. But then when they were dried, they just crinkled up, and it didn't have the same fresh fish look or fresh fish effect. And it just totally changed how the light was hitting it as well. It didn't have any kind of nice sheen to it. So I realized I had to work with these fish skins fresh, but I needed to sculpt with them. So I bought a whole pile of wire mesh, which is the type of wire mesh that's in sieves. And I initially was sewing the fish skins onto the wire mesh and then cutting them out once they'd all been sewn. I later realized that a stapler was a much quicker way of attaching the skins to the wire mesh. So I could only get, again, this took like it was probably like a couple of nights, maybe 3 nights worth of work. So I was having to put all these salmon skins into the, out and in and out of the freezer to keep them fresh. and then still have them fresh enough for the day that we were shooting, because I was realizing that the model's face was having to go in there, and I didn't want it to be smelling of rotten fish at all. So the image on the right was the direction I went with the mask in the end. Again, there was just loads of playing about with how I wanted these panels of salmon skin to interact with one another. So I learnt my lesson and decided that I wanted to take a friend on shoots with me from now on, because doing things by yourself when your model is blind was really quite difficult, and the sea was like an extra hazard, which I had to take into account. So it was really good having my friend's help. And the image on the right is just me holding Scott's hand, having to guide him to where he had to go, because sometimes with the masks he has on, Scott can maybe see a tiny wee bit. But with this, he was totally, couldn't see anything, had no sense of direction of where he was. So I was having to take him from A to B and really let him know, like, okay, so some small waves might come up to where you are, or, you know, this is where you're standing, just so he could suss out himself or imagine himself where he was and feel quite secure in how he was posing his body. And this was a mask as well, which could only be shot from one side, because my salmon skins weren't long enough to wrap all the way around the head, and I didn't have enough salmon skins to do both sides. So it was just one side panel, so I had to shoot from one direction. So these were some of the photos I got from that shoot. Again, Scott had his wetsuit on, and I just had fabric, which I incorporated in with this mask. And there was some really wild waves happening. Just got him doing different poses, and just seeing how this merman, what type of body language he would have, because again, I didn't want it to be too performative. I didn't want it to look like a person in a mask. So quite often I go for quite subtle body language and poses in my pictures, because I think it gives, I don't want my images to have a very performative vibe. I want them to seem quite authentic, like you have actually come across something strange in the landscape. So this was the final image that I chose to go with for my salmon mask. And oopsies. And this was my triptych. And there was a showcase that Northward did, which where these were exhibited for the first time. So it was great. I was really pleased with them. And I'm just aware of time. I do have more images I can show you, so it's up to you, Steve, if you want me to continue or if you're wanting me to leave it there.
Well, we're a wee bit late in starting, so how many do you have?
I've got a few, but I can whiz through them.
Okay, let's see them, because that's what we're here for. Go for it.
That's fine, and you can give me a 2-minute warning if I'm going over.
That's okay.
So the last project that I took part in was called Neborinich, which means the woman, and I did this last year. And this was really interesting and fun because it was a collaborative project with another artist who was a printmaker. So we met up and approached in Lunter, the art centre in Stornoway, saying we would like to have an exhibition for the Year of Stories, and the idea we're pitching to you is visual images about Hebridean women, either in folklore or in history. So in Lunter, we're happy to give us dates to have their gallery, and they just trusted us to fill their gallery with stuff. So these were some of the sources that we used. So again, this is moving into a new way of working for me, or there's been a progression, because with Guardians, it was all very intuitive and I was just making work which was coming straight from myself. But with this, I was very aware of the source material, and I was wanting to respect the source material, which was something that I can find quite a bit daunting, because I don't want to, I would worry that I'm giving off the wrong impression or I'm communicating something badly. So that's something I've just had to, over my kind of artistic journey, really wrestle with myself and learn that, it's okay to have a creative spin on stories that already exist, and reimagine it for yourself, and that's a good thing. So these were some of the sources that I used. Feel free to take a note. And again, I wanted to try out new materials, because I never want to use the same thing twice. And one of the stories which was in this exhibition was about a crow queen. I think it was a story that came from South Uist, and it was pretty much this crow queen, this woman got turned into a crow because she turned her husband's sons into seals. So the king then turned her into a crow, so he got his own back. So pretty much this wasn't a nice lady. She was a very jealous lady, and she got what was coming to her. But me reading that story, just the word crow stuck in my head, and I was like, I want to use wings and feathers to reimagine this image. And I knew a guy in my village who quite often shot geese to manage the numbers. So I asked him if he was ever doing that in the future, would he keep the wings for me? Because he just, when he shot the geese, they weren't getting used for anything, I don't think. So he gave me a whole pile of goose wings. So I had to learn how to preserve these goose wings, because with this project I was very determined to show the masks in the exhibition. So I had to learn how to remove all the flesh and preserve these goose wings, which took, I think they had to dry for a couple of weeks. So I went through a kind of washing process, a salting process, again, all done in my kitchen. And then I hung the wings up around my house, and they were hanging there for 2 weeks. So whenever anyone came in, they were asking questions. And then once the wings were preserved, we started building with them. And again, I had to enlist the help of Dad to build a kind of copper frame for me. And just having an extra pair of hands there to hold stuff up, so I can take a step back and see how this mask is coming together. I feel like as my mask ideas have kind of gotten a bit, the ideas have gotten bigger, or the vision I have for them is a bit more out there. It requires more hands than just my own. So yeah, I enlisted Dad's help for this, and he was helping me. He was positioning the wings, and then I would ask him to drill holes in the wire, and we would connect the wings, not the wire, the copper pipe, and we would connect the wings to the copper pipe. So these were some of the images taken with this. My mum modelled this shoot for me. So this was a really interesting thing about the Hebridean project, was that I couldn't use Scott as my model, and I'd used him as my model for every other shoot I'd ever done. So I was really quite nervous about using other people, because I was worried that they'd feel uncomfortable in the masks that I'd made. But I was just a bit more, I wasn't feeling as confident, because I really wanted to give a good impression to these models. So I thought I'd start off with my mum for this project, because there was trust already there. So yeah, so we just got a jacket and a coat that she already had, that we thought worked really well with the mask, and we took her to the beach and tried out some different photographs, and this was the final one, which again I thought kind of spoke about the story a bit better, about this crow queen being quite an intimidating character and being a bit of a villain. And I liked how the mask was presented as well. So now I'm at the point, in terms of yes, my parents are still Christians. I just had a question there about if my parents, about their faith. My mum is a Christian lady, but they're both really supportive of my art practice, and my mum was really happy to be the Crow Queen in this story and model this image for me. So we did that one, and then this was one of my favourite shoots. Our favourite making processes with this project. So I took part in a workshop to learn how to make a creel, a Hebridean creel. So quite often if you look up like old Hebridean images, there's pictures of women carrying creels on their back and there's loads of peat in them or seaweed in them. And I just thought, when it comes to Hebridean women, that's quite an iconic image. So the creel needs to be represented in this story somehow, or in this exhibition somehow. So I took part in a creel making workshop, and Dawn is the lady who taught me how to make the creel, and she's a professional creel maker, one of the only creel makers left, I think. There's not many people making creels at all, and she grows her own willow and is really keeping this craft alive. So she showed me how to make it, and I made a mask based on the creel that we made together in the workshop. And at this particular point, the image on the left-hand side, I really liked how the willow was standing up, and I thought that was something I'd like to incorporate into my mask. So after the creel making process, I asked Dawn if she would model for me she knew that I was going to be making a mask based on the creel that we'd made together. She knew that that's why I wanted to do the workshop. So at the end of the day, I asked, will you be the model? And maybe we can incorporate the creel we made together into the photo shoot as well. And she was keen to take part. So the next day, I left Dawn's with a pile of willow that she'd given me from her garden for me to make my mask. And the next day, while the kind of information was still fresh in my brain, I started making my own creel mask at home. And when I was at Dawn's, we were planting the willow into a wooden frame, but she said that a traditional way that people used to make it, if they didn't have a frame, was they would just stab the willow into the ground and use the turf to make the initial square shape. And the weather's not very good up here in the Hebrides that often. I didn't want to be making a creel outside in the rain. So I cut some turf out of one of my dad's crofts and brought it into the kitchen and started making my creel there. So my kitchen was just a mad area for a few days while this got made. And this was the image that I shot with Dawn. We were actually on her peat bank as well. We used that as the location. And we incorporated the creel that we made together. So this image is really kind of special to me because the whole making experience and photography experience was just felt like it came full circle. And it was really wonderful making a connection with someone new and feel like you're learning a skill from another professional. Usually when I'm making my masks, I feel like I'm kind of just playing about, starting from scratch, and I'm having to suss stuff out for myself. But Dawn was really passing on her expertise and her knowledge, and I just loved that. I loved speaking to someone else who was excited about what they made. So yeah, so this image just feels really special for me. And next I moved on to a new material for another one of my images. There was a story about, from an old Gaelic song, which is about this woman whose lover is hurt in battle because he's fighting a giant. And he's supposed to carry this shield back to a particular destination, and since he's been hurt in battle, he can't do it. So he asks his lover, will you please carry this shield and take it back to where it needs to be? And she accepts it, but it's something that no woman has done before. So I really like that story because it was about this female character just doing something for the first time, and there was an idea of strength, like carrying something that usually only a man would carry or potentially have the physical strength to carry. And I love the idea of a shield. So I decided that I would make a shield. And my material of choice was deer antlers. And they are the most difficult material I have ever worked with. They just have no give at all. I did a wee test in my dad's barn with a few antlers, and I could see that they wanted to, like, they could interlock with each other. You could get bits of the antlers connecting quite nicely, and I could make a kind of rough shield shape. But when it came to making the actual shield, it was bigger than the one I'd done a mock version of. And I really needed the help of Dad with his drill. It was definitely a two-man job to get all these antlers connected in a really sturdy way, because again, I wanted all the masks from this project to be something that I could show in the exhibition, and I really wanted this shield to have durability, and also I wanted it to be safe for my model to be able to hold and carry, because it ended up being really, really heavy at the end of it. So this took a good few days, and it was something I couldn't do on my own at all, because handling the antlers were so awkward. But I was really happy with the final image. We went to my model, Mary. We went up to the Harris Hills. So this was actually taken on the Clishan. And the weather wasn't too nice at all, but it's really steep. It's quite a hostile feeling environment, especially when the weather's not that great. And I just had her being really strong, being able to carry this shield, because it was no easy feat. I was amazed that that she was able to hold it with such ease. So this was really interesting as well, because I was making a sculptural piece for the first time that wasn't a mask, and I was quite nervous, I think, about now having to think about people's facial expressions in my photography. I was like, this is an extra thing to consider, which I've managed to avoid for the past 2 years. So again, I probably shot 2 rolls of film. There was a handful of images that I was happy with, because I was having to think of these extra things, like what is Mary's, or in this case, Arlene, the character, what is her expression right now, and is she communicating, is she telling the story I want her to tell? And I thought that this image did that. This is another Mary. And sorry, I'm just checking the time. This is another Mary, who the character she is playing is called Christina. This story is about a woman who, a real life story of a woman who saved a boat of fishermen who they got stuck out at sea, and she could see from her house that there was a boat of fishermen stuck out there and they were in real trouble. So she threw rope out to them. And since she threw that rope out to them, they were able to come to shore, and she took them all to her house and nursed them back to health, fed them, and then they left in the morning. So yes, this woman essentially saved a boat of men who would have drowned or got lost at sea if it wasn't for her help. So I really liked this story, and I was thinking of a way that I could visually interpret it. And I was looking into rope making a little bit, and I heard or had seen somewhere that heather rope was something that used to get made on the island and something that used to get used, and it was a very strong thing. So I went about picking loads of heather from the moors on the island and twisting them together to make rope. And this is how I made this headpiece. So again, it showed the model's face, because I was having the same kind of approach as I would to my masks normally, of just using the material and then kind of letting it become what it wants to be. And I wasn't too sure initially, would this be, let's call it a wearable sculpture that would show a face or not. I wasn't sure what kind of road I would go down, but again, the material was really quite difficult and wanted to behave in a certain way. So I thought this kind of wrapping around the face worked really well. And Mary is who modelled this image. I hadn't met her. Alice, who I was collaborating with, knew her, but I didn't know her before this, and it was just really wonderful to meet new people. She's a fellow artist as well. So through this whole project, I felt like I was meeting new people and making new connections, and it was just making these shoots feel really special. So again, this was a really great experience. I think I only shot one roll of film here because the weather started getting that bad, and thankfully we got it on the first roll. So my next image, or my next mask, was made from cotton, and this was a material I wanted to use for, I think, the previous 2 summers. I can't remember what month cotton usually pops up, but for the past 2 years I'd see cotton on the side of the road and I'd be like, I want to make something with that one day, and I could just never think of what. And I feel like cotton isn't up for very long either. It's there for about maybe like a few weeks and then it goes. And for this project, I came across a story about the White Cow of Lewis. So it's a folk tale about a village in Cullinesh, it's a village in Lewis. So this village are going through a period of famine and they're starving and they don't know what to do. And this woman called Anya sees a white cow emerge from the sea, and that cow offers its milk to the village, and that's what sustains the village through this period of famine. So I thought, what's white? Cotton. What's natural? What's a material that I've wanted to use for ages? Cotton. So me and Scott went cotton picking, and we had it drying out in my kitchen for a few days, and it was a really lovely material to work with. I was just piercing it through metal mesh. And then my model, Laura, came to try it on before it was finished, because the idea I had for this shoot was that the model, who was a kind of reimagining of the white cow, would be breastfeeding, because the cow provided all its milk to the town. So my friend Laura had just become a mum, and I asked her, I was like, would you and your wee boy Seth, would you like to take part in this photo shoot? It's a breastfeeding photo shoot with a twist, because there's a mask involved. And she was really up for it. So that's what we did. So we took, we spent a wee bit of time familiarising Seth with the idea that his mum was going to have to wear a mask, and that she wasn't going to look like his mum for a wee while. And Alice, the artist who I was collaborating with, made some really beautiful backdrops for this image as well. So she made a Cullinesh stone on some fabric and printed on some other backdrop fabric as well. And with all these pieces, we created this image, which I was really pleased with, because I'd never worked with a baby before. And I was really aware of the baby being comfortable. So we took this image inside, and that was a very conscious decision, because I didn't want the baby to be like totally wrapped up, but I didn't want him to be cold either. So all of us, like me, Alice, and the mum, Laura, kind of decided taking the picture inside would be much more comfortable for everybody. And it just gave us a bit more control as well. So again, we used mostly just, I had the one pose in mind, and I just shot a couple of rolls of film hoping that I'd get a good image, and I just had to tweak a few things and The baby was really great. He held still for quite a lot of it as well. And this story here is about the tangled sister. So it's about, no, the jealous sister, I'm sorry, it's called The Jealous Sister. It's a story about a woman who kills her sister by drowning her, by tangling her hair up in the sea. I think they were fighting over a boy. I think that's what caused the rift. So Alice, the other artist in this collaboration, she printed seaweed on this fabric, and the plan was to tangle up the model in the fabric and shoot her in the sea. And we were really conscious that we wanted a model who was not only like a strong swimmer, but happy being in the water and happy getting cold. Because previously on one of the merman shoots that I did, I asked Scott to go quite deep into the water, and it was the first time we ever had to call off a shoot because it was just too cold for him. So since I was working with, especially, people who I maybe didn't know very well, I was really, really aware that I wanted people to be comfortable. So our model here, Ailey, is a really strong swimmer, really comfortable getting into the cold without a wetsuit, or getting into the sea without a wetsuit when the weather's cold. And she was really up for modelling for us as well. So she was incredible to work with. And we were playing about with wrapping the fabric around her in this kind of wee pool of water that had formed. So she didn't really have to contend with waves or anything. It was quite a gentle area, and there was really lovely seaweed in there as well. It was quite a difficult shoot though, because the water is moving so much. I had Alice was on that shoot helping out. We had Scott in the water, and he was having to move Ailey, like he'd have to like pull her legs back into shot, or because she would drift off with the water, and I had like a kind of tripod set on a rock up above. So it was quite challenging in that sense, just because water behaves differently to all the other shoots that I've done. But we got this image here as our final image, that I was really, really happy with, because it had that kind of tangle of the hair with the seaweed, and I thought Ailey's body language and face looked good. So again, I'm still getting comfortable with models' faces and the expression that their faces have in these images, because I didn't want her to look too posed, especially if she was playing someone who was, or portraying a character who was like drowned or drowning. So I thought she looked quite kind of serene in this image. There you go. And this is one of our last slides, I think. So this is, this model here is Alice, who I collaborated with. And this image here kind of is really shows how our collaboration came together. So Alice made the outfit and the seaweed fabric, and she also made this big backdrop. And the character she was portraying was called Breacha, and she's the goddess of summer in kind of Celtic folklore. So I made the kind of headpiece, and I wanted to use plant life. And it was still summer at this time. So we had an idea that we would shoot outside, but we wanted to incorporate her backdrop. So I went down to the beach that's closest to me, and there was these really lovely sea flowers growing from the sand, like just these patches of it. I hadn't seen it before. And I was like, wouldn't that be really cool to have like plant growth, which is natural and living, but the background be a drawing, and just really kind of merge that real and unreal and otherworldliness. So we went down and Alice modelled this for me. And this ended up being our final image. So it had to be a kind of tighter image because of the width of the backdrop. But also these were presented in the exhibition as, I think they were 7 feet tall. Like this image was 7 feet tall. So it was like a life-size image. But I was really pleased with how it came out, with kind of that fusion of printmaking and photography and sculpture. It was just, yeah, I was really chuffed with it. So we did the goddess of summer and we did the goddess of winter like this, with the with the drawn backgrounds and a natural foreground and a kind of mask. And oops. And I'll just finish off here with, this is the exhibition we had at the end for Neboronich, which showed the photography, most of which I've shown you, and it also incorporated the masks, and Alice made animations as well, which I haven't got in these pictures here, but you can see a wee bit in the bottom right. So yeah, I was really happy with how the sculptures and masks worked with the photography. It was my first time ever doing that in an exhibition, and it's how I always want to exhibit in the future when kind of given that opportunity, because it just, you know, the masks are great pieces of work in themselves, I think, and I think they deserve to get shown if they do have that durability factor. So yeah, so that is me, I think. I am happy to take any questions, and I'm sorry if I went way over.
That's okay. What's quite interesting to me is my very start, the very first one you did about all the masks and all that stuff, because it's very non-Lusach to, because normally you get the Curum when you're getting a bit older, and you've gone the anti-Curum, haven't you? You could have the other way.
Yeah, it's like something I kind of, because, you know, the Isle of Lewis is a very Christian place. It's a very particular interpretation of Christianity as well.
Yep.
So I just kind of grew up with that. And then when I moved away to Glasgow, you ask more questions, because I suppose you're out of that. You see more people with different backgrounds and different points of view or ways of seeing the world. And it just made me ask more questions. And I just had to come to, yeah, I just really had to, I was confronted with what I believed and I had to change, was what I came to.
And that's where we talked at the very start about the Christianity paganism thing. That's where your mass stuff was very, very redolent of that, wasn't it? It showed that kind of journey all the way through. And the rest of the stuff that you presented, you know, good old dads, good old dads, what good things they are. And
yeah, they've been fab. And I always thought that, you know, you'd hit a point in life where you grew out of needing your dad's help. But so far for me, that hasn't happened at all. I feel like the older I get, the more help I need, because I get more ambitious with my projects, or, you know, my requests get more complicated.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. I'm still doing stuff with my kids, and they're adults as well, so it just doesn't happen. But that's part of the circle of life, isn't it? At one point, you'll have kids, and you and Scott will have kids, and it'll end up being the same thing, and you'll carry on, and your dad will be the old boy in the background, and you'll be doing things for him, and it just all works on.
Yeah, so I just need to make sure that I remember what he's actually teaching me.
Absolutely.
So I've got something to pass on.
Well, it does. My son fitted his own toilet seat last week for the first time, because it broke, and he fitted a new one, and I checked it afterwards, and he did a good job. So you do absorb it in. So I'm sure he'll be grand. I'm sure he'll be grand. So yeah, it's been a fascinating journey through all the stuff that you've been doing on Lewis. Do you want to unshare your screen now as well?
Oh yeah, sorry. Let me do that. Stop share. There we go.
So there's wee 9-year-old Sholto says he loves all the masks and all the work you've done. So that's wonderful, isn't it? And using make his own mask out of own hair.
Oh, I love that. That's something that's an idea right there that I might steal from you.
Yeah. So most of the images were black and white, but are you shooting in colour? Somebody's asking, Malin's asking, are you shooting in colour, or are you shooting in black and white from the start?
Yeah, I kind of, because I made that decision in Guardians to shoot black and white for that project. And since then, I've really enjoyed shooting in black and white. I think I now like develop my own black and white film. I go to the Island Darkroom to do that.
Yep.
So I feel like I've got a bit more of a kind of relationship, I suppose, with black and white film now. But I am open if there's a project that comes to mind where I think color will really work for that. I'm open to trying it out, but I just feel more confident using black and white. I think I feel like you look at the image differently. I feel like you pay more attention to like the textures and stuff going on, and with what I make with the masks and stuff, I think that's something I want people to notice, is the form itself. So black and white has worked for me so far.
Although you're saying that, but the early images you showed of the masks and the colour palette was actually pretty good, wasn't it? The jumper and the back, it all actually worked pretty well. And I know you've watched the Bella Kotak talk that we did last month, and she very much works in colour schemes and colour harmonies. So your very first ones actually in colour worked pretty well, didn't they?
Yeah, I did like that one, and it did make me, it was a discussion that I had with Mari, who was my mentor, because I did like the colour image.
Yeah.
But I think I was also wondering, okay, I've got 4 more images and they're all going to have to be harmonious with one another. And I was just thinking about kind of logistics in terms of clothing that I owned and stuff. And I was like, can I actually do this? So for that project, black and white was the safer option.
Yeah, it's in the movie film certainly gives you more consistency across that, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It was the consistency that I was looking for.
Although I also quite like the fact it was analog colour rather than digital colour, because there's a difference there. And the analog colours are a wee bit softer and a bit nicer. There's Josh is asking, is there a book in the offing?
Is there a, what, sorry?
A book.
A book? Me making a book?
Aye.
I would love to make a book at some point. It is, it's up there with like a 5-year dream I have. I feel like I just want to make more work first so that I've got enough to fill a book. Because these images, currently all I've done is these 3 projects out with uni. So I feel like I want to make a bit more, maybe get a bit more experimental as well, push myself out of my comfort zone. Like I haven't really had 2 models in an image yet. There's more I want to do.
Yeah.
But a book is the ultimate goal.
James is asking down there, but got this experimental stuff, would you do more blurry stuff or out of focus stuff? Now that's relatively straightforward in digital because you can see that and control that, but it is a wee bit harder on analog stuff, isn't it?
Well,
I do know what you're getting. Yeah.
I do loads of unintentional blurry stuff all the time. That's why usually I get like 2 or 3 good images on one roll of film. There's always like a bit of out of focus happening. But yeah, I've done it with digital. I haven't taken the plunge yet with doing it with black and white. I feel maybe I would like to do it on a 35mm camera first. Just since medium format's a bit slower, and I think the kind of the slowness of it just makes me worried that I'd miss something. And also with how kind of expensive black and white film could be. I think maybe starting off 35.
Yeah, good. Yeah, well, I think that's, we'll call the night a wrap and let everybody get away. I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your time and sharing your thoughts and sharing the stories. And I mean, the Western Isles, the Hebrides in general, are full of stories and full of things like that. And it's, there's somebody saying she's been looking at your work already. And the Margaret Fay Shaw stuff is a television programme available called Solace, if anybody wants to look that one up. And some of those images from the old days when they were doing some of the Halloween imagery masks, they were really scary looking things. Really scary, I mean, quite disturbing. You can see where some of these Japanese horror books, horror films get their investigations from. So we're going to let everybody go. Thank Danielle very much for talking to us, and thank everybody for coming along. The ones who didn't manage tonight because of the mix-up with the start of it, we'll get links out to everybody anyway, so that we can all share it at a later time, and it will be on YouTube, so Danielle's folks can watch it. Because her mum and dad definitely deserve a shout out for that. And Morag as the Crow Queen. Well, I'll ask her that next time I see her in the summertime.
I think we had one more question as well that I just like to answer. So influences that I have, and Amy here actually guessed correctly. Eyes as big as plates is a huge influence of mine. Charles Freger is another great influence of mine, and Holly Wilmoth. So yeah, if she wants to check them out.
Yeah. So Amy, how far on in your studies are you? Are you in Glasgow as well?
Hi there, I'm studying with UHI. I was in Newest last year and I'm in Orkney this year, and I'm going to Shetland next year. So I'm moving around, and I just love Danielle's work. It was so illuminating here, you speaking about it. I'm really interested in your choice of materials and working with the materials and playing with the materials and letting the materials speak, because that's a big part of my work. I've been working with kelp. So lots of what you told us tonight resonated with me. And yeah, Holly Willis, I don't know, so I'll check that out. Thank you.
Oh no, but Wilmoth, sorry, W-I-L-M-I-T.
Holly Wilmoth. Okay,
Wilmoth.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Were you collecting kelp down in Newest with Mrs. Bird, with Phyllis Bird? Was it Phyllis Bird? Was her first name? GP's wife. She
Oh, if you're thinking of Fiona Bird, no, she was
Fiona.
In South Uist. I was in North Uist.
Okay.
But I'm collecting kelp wherever I go. It's an obsession now.
That's an obsession that's up there with obsessions.
Kelp masks as well. Kelp masks.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll be seeing a book called The Kelpies then, will we? And that's been done before, isn't it, The Kelpies? Right, thank you very much, everyone. If Danielle could stay on a wee bit longer, and David and Ken as well, probably, and we'll end the recording there. That's the last for this series of the Scottish RPS talks. There will be more next year. We'll be getting in touch with people again, so keep an eye on the website. We'll send out emails to people, and in the meantime, Echiva.